An old buddy of mine up here in McCree Bend, Raymond Harjo, he told me and Mutt McGuire, he met us up there here about a year or two ago at McCree Bend in the road, and we got to talking, and Mutt asked old Ray if he'd seen any more ghosts. Ray said, "No, I haven't." But he says, says old man Martin come down to see me every once in a while, said, and Mutt said, "Well, Mr. Martin's been dead for 3 or 4 years." And Raymond said, "Yeah." Says, "That's right, but he still come to see me." Says, "I can be in the house." See, Raymond's a bachelor. He don't have no wife. He lives up there all by himself. And Raymond says, "I can be in the house there at night watching TV," and says, "I can hear Mr. Martin open the gate just like he used to when he was living and when he used to come to see me. And he'll open the gate, and I can hear him walking up to my porch. And then I can hear him climbing up on my steps, coming on up over my porch, and I can hear him making a step, and I can hear that old walking stick of his pecking on the floor. And then my door, I can watch my door, and I can see my doorknob turning. And sometimes," he said, "I'll run up there when that doorknob is turning, and says, I'll open that door. And says, there won't be nobody there. Nobody." But he says, like I said, Mutt and Jack, Mr. Martin still comes to see me. And now, like I say, Raymond lives up in McCree Bend, and all kind of goings on always has happened up in McCree Bend. And Raymond is saying, "By the way, here a couple of months ago, I had a terrible experience." He said, "There's a bunch of people down at Eufaula come by my house and went on down and camped at the rapids. See, on the North Canadian River, there's some rock down there, and they've always called it the rapids." Said, They were camped at the rapids. Said there were 3 or 4 families and their kids, and they were all camped out down there, and they were fishing and having a wonderful time. And said, I was asleep. It was long about 12 o'clock midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And he said, all at once my dog started barking, and said, I heard their pickups are coming up. And said they come up and didn't even open my wire gate. They just run through my wire gate, and they went on out in the road and took off. And he said the next morning, he said, I got wondering what in the world happened to those guys. And to act like that. And said, I went down there where they were camped. And he said there was their portable table still set up, and there was their pots and pans out there. And there was some sleeping rolls laying on the ground, and said he just looked like death and destruction had visited that place. But I didn't see any bodies, but they had up and jumped in their cars and pickups and took off for no reason at all that I knew. And he said, I remembered one of them, and said I went to town that day, and said I looked him up, and said, his name was Sam Barnett. I said, Sam, you were up there with that bunch camped out at the rapids, weren't you? He said, oh, yeah, I was up there. And says, I ain't going back either. And said, I told him, says, Sam, all your equipment's up there. Says, you got your bedrolls laying on the ground. Says, I kind of gathered them up. And you got all your pots and pans scattered out there. And says, I gathered them up. And says, what happened? What happened to you guys? He said, well, we had a wonderful time. We caught some fish, and we had a big supper, and we had a big old fire go. Excuse me. My memory is beginning to fade me again. So I got to build this memory up. Getting better all the time. But old Sam, he says, then we all decided to turn in because we'd had a good day. Excuse me just a second here. Said we'd had a busy day, so we decided to turn in. And part of us were asleep, and the rest of us were kind of talking, you know, very low back and forth, and said all at once we heard a wagon a-coming up. Now, I don't know, you guys have never heard a wagon, just a plain old ordinary wagon. But when they come up, well, the iron wheels hit on rocks and sticks, and the axles kind of make a popping like sound as they go back and forth. He said, we heard this wagon a-coming up. And said, then we heard another wagon a-coming up. It looked like there were 3 or 4 wagons drove up. And said they stopped, just right even with us. Says a little ways over, but even with us. And then we began to hear these chains and buckets. And said, no one said a word. Said, we were just laying there listening. And said, nobody in those wagons said a word. But we could hear some men get out of this wagon. And said it looked like they had handcuffs on or leg irons on. And then we could hear them take the buckets out of the wagons, and then we could hear them go down to the river, and we could hear them dip up water. And we just said to ourselves, those are prisoners in those wagons, either going down to Judge Parker's court, or maybe captured by the army, or captured by somebody, and they're going down the river to get water for camp. And said we could hear every step they made because of those leg irons. And said they were moaning and groaning. Never said a word, but they were moaning and groaning in terrible pain. And said here they would come back up to the wagon. And he said, you know what? Well, he said, along about that time, said we sold out, said everybody was awake, and said we'd run over each other getting into our pickups and cars, and said we come out of there, and says we like to left somebody, said I don't remember who it was, but we heard him a-yelling, and said pretty soon he was running so fast that he overtook the last car, and he jumped in the bed of a pickup, and said we come on out, said, we ain't a-going back. And Raymond said, well, yeah, you got to go back and get your stuff. And Raymond said, well, said 3 or 4 days, Sam and 4 or 5 other guys come up there in broad daylight, and they went down there and gathered up all their equipment and took it. But this country is not like it used to be. It's pretty well civilized now. We used to drink rot gut whiskey. Now we drink bourbon. And that's a sign of civilization, is the kind of whiskey you drink. Remember that. Always. And now that's just about it. You want to ask me some questions now, right quick? Speak up now so that camera can get your voice.
How come Bald Hill is so scary?
How come what?
Bald Hill is so scary.
Bald Hill?
Bald Mountain.
Bald Mountain?
Uh-huh.
I don't think it's so scary. I used to go up there all the time when I was a kid. I never did see anything. I never did see anything over here, and I've been over there where that old house was and where those slave quarters were at 1 o'clock in the morning, checking on the cows, but I never have seen anything. But I guess I've lost my touch. I used to be able to pick all that stuff up, but now I don't guess I can pick it up anymore. Well, Raymond, I guess maybe that's about it, I guess, as far as I know. Now, what I've said has been all authenticated, true stories that good God-fearing, mother-loving, apple pie-loving people have told. And I can get affidavits on all of it, affidavits.